The desert wind carried the sound of dying across Jake Morrison's ranch that September morning in 1878. He'd been walking to his well when he heard it, a rasping, desperate breath that no living thing should make. Following the sound, Jake found tiny drops of blood in the sand, dark spots leading from the scrub brush toward his water. There, collapsed beside the stone well, lay an Apache girl no more than 12 years old. Her deerskin dress was torn and stained, her lips cracked white from thirst. Hollow eyes stared up at the Arizona sky, seeing nothing. The child was maybe an hour from death. Jake knelt and cupped water in his weathered hands. "Easy now, little one," he whispered. She was too weak even to drink. As he lifted her toward his cabin, 3 riders appeared on the distant mesa, watching through spyglasses. In the Arizona territory, showing kindness to the wrong person could get a man hanged. But Jake Morrison was about to learn that some debts take 15 years to collect. The fever nearly took her the first night. Jake laid the girl on his only bed, a rough pine frame with a corn husk mattress. By lamplight, her breathing came in short, sharp gasps that cut through the silence of his one-room cabin. He'd seen plenty of men die during the war, but this was different. This was a child, and she was dying under his roof. He boiled water on his wood stove and tore strips from his cleanest shirt. The wet cloth felt cool against her burning forehead. "Stay with me now," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. "You're safe here." But as Jake tended her fever, his own memories surfaced like ghosts in the firelight. Cold nights on Civil War battlefields, the screams of wounded soldiers, the face of that young Union boy he'd left behind during a Confederate charge. The boy couldn't have been more than 16, calling for his mother as Jake's unit retreated. Jake had looked back once, then forced himself to keep running. He'd carried that guilt for 10 years, and now here was another child in need. When dawn broke, Jake examined the girl more carefully. What he found made his stomach turn. Carved into her thin arms were symbols, deliberate marks that looked like tribal script. These weren't battle scars or accidents. Someone had cut these marks into her skin on purpose. Jake had seen Apache prisoners before, but never marked like this. Whatever these symbols meant, they told a story of rejection. Her own people had cast her out. The girl stirred as he prepared breakfast. Jake looked up from his coffee pot to find dark eyes watching him with surprising intelligence. She tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "Water," she managed in broken English. Jake brought a tin cup to her lips. She drank greedily, then studied his face with those sharp eyes. "Red cloud," she whispered, "will come for me." Jake's blood went cold. Every man, woman, and child in the territory knew that name. Red Cloud, the Apache war chief who'd been terrorizing settlements from Texas to California. The most wanted Indian in America, with a $1,000 bounty on his head. "Red Cloud's coming here?" Jake asked. The girl's eyes fluttered closed. "Will come," she repeated, then fell back into fevered sleep. Jake sat back on his heels, mind racing. Was she threatening him, warning him, or was this just fever talk from a dying child? Outside, his cattle lowed in the morning heat. Life on this isolated ranch had been simple, boring even. He raised beef, sold what he could to passing wagon trains, and kept to himself. His nearest neighbor was Old Murphy, 5 miles east, and the closest town was a hard day's ride south. Now he had an Apache girl in his bed, and she was talking about Red Cloud, like she knew him personally. Jake looked at her small form under his blanket. Whatever those symbols meant, whatever trouble she represented, one thing was clear: she was just a child, and she was dying. He'd already failed one young person in his life. He wouldn't fail another. He spent the rest of that day and night fighting her fever. When it finally broke on the third morning, she opened her eyes and looked at him with perfect clarity. "Kind eyes," she said, in heavily accented English, pointing at Jake. "Jake," he replied, tapping his chest. "My name is Jake." She nodded slowly. "Jake, kind eyes." Then she touched her own chest. I am. She struggled with the English words, then said something in Apache that sounded like flowing water. "I'll call you Maria," Jake said gently. It was his mother's name. For the first time since he'd found her, the girl smiled. That afternoon, Jake sat on his porch whittling a piece of pine while Maria rested inside. The rhythmic scraping of his knife against wood was soothing, almost meditative. He was carving a small bird, nothing fancy, just something to occupy his hands while his mind worked through the situation. When he finished, he showed it to Maria. Her eyes widened, and for a moment Jake saw past the trauma and fear to the child underneath. She traced the wooden bird's wings with one finger, then looked up at Jake with something approaching wonder. It was the first genuine smile he'd seen on another human being in years. But as the sun set behind the western mountains, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful moment was borrowed time. Somewhere out there, Red Cloud was coming, and Jake still had no idea whether that was a promise of rescue or a threat of death. Over the following days, Jake and Maria developed their own language of gestures and simple words. She was a quick learner, soaking up English like the desert soaked up rare rain. When she wanted water, she'd point to the well and make a drinking motion. When she was hungry, she'd rub her stomach and point to the stove. Jake found himself talking more than he had in years, naming everything around the cabin. "Fire," he'd say, pointing to the flames. "Bread, coffee, horse." Maria would repeat each word carefully, rolling the foreign sounds around her tongue like stones. One morning, as Jake prepared breakfast, Maria pointed to herself and spoke a long phrase in Apache. Then she pointed to him and said, "Kind eyes." "That's what you call me?" Jake asked. Maria nodded solemnly. "Apache name, kind eyes. See? Heart." She touched her chest. Jake felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he couldn't quite name. Nobody had given him a name since his mother died. Certainly not a name that meant something. "Kind eyes," he repeated softly. Their peaceful morning was interrupted by hoofbeats. Jake looked out the window to see old Murphy approaching on his gray mare, a pack mule trailing behind, loaded with supplies. "Stay inside," Jake told Maria. "Don't make a sound." Murphy was a good neighbor and a decent man, but Jake wasn't ready to explain an Apache girl in his cabin. Not yet. "Morning, Jake," Murphy called as he dismounted. "Brought your monthly supplies from town." "Much obliged, Murphy." Jake stepped onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind him. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." Murphy tied off his horses and accepted the offered cup. "Quiet out here as always, I see." "Quiet's how I like it." Murphy took a long sip, then set down the cup with a serious expression. "Jake, I got to ask you something, and I need you to answer straight. You seen any Apache sign around here lately?" Jake kept his face neutral. "Apache? Why?" "Federal marshals been through town, asking questions. Seems there's been reports of a young Apache girl in these parts. They're offering good money for information." Murphy studied Jake's face. "Real good money." $100 for information leading to capture. $100. More money than most folks in the territory saw in a year. "Haven't seen any Apache," Jake lied smoothly. "But I'll keep my eyes open." Murphy nodded. but something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Jake, you know I think highly of you, but these are dangerous times. Federal government's got no patience for folks who might show sympathy to the wrong people." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Means there's been talk about Apache sympathizers, folks who might hide Indians from the law." Murphy's voice dropped lower. "They're calling them traitors, Jake, and traitors hang." Jake felt ice in his veins, but he kept his voice steady. "Appreciate the warning, Murphy." After Murphy left, Jake sat on his porch for a long time, thinking. $100 bounty was serious money. And if federal marshals were actively hunting Maria, it meant she was more important than just another Apache child. Inside the cabin, Maria emerged from where she'd been hiding behind the bed. "Danger?" she asked in English. Jake nodded. "Yes, danger." That evening, Jake worked by lamplight, carving another piece of wood. This time, he was making something more complex. A small horse with a flowing mane. Maria watched with fascination as the shape emerged from the pine. When he finished, Jake held up the wooden horse. "For you," he said. Maria took it reverently, turning it over in her small hands. She looked up at Jake with eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why?" she asked. "Why, you save me?" It was the same question Jake had been asking himself for days. He'd found a dying Apache child and taken her in, despite the risks, despite the bounty, despite everything his survival instincts told him. Jake opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The truth was, he didn't know. Something about finding her by his well, seeing her small form collapsed in the sand, had stirred something in him that had been dormant for years. Maybe it was guilt over the boy he'd left behind in the war. Maybe it was simple human decency. Or maybe it was something else entirely. "I don't know," he admitted. Maria nodded as if this made perfect sense. She held up the wooden horse, admiring the way the lamplight played across its carved surface. Outside, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon, growing larger against the setting sun. 3 riders were approaching at a fast pace, and even from this distance, Jake could see they weren't neighbors coming for a social visit. He reached for his rifle. "Maria," he said quietly, "get under the bed, now." The 3 men who rode into Jake's yard looked like trouble wrapped in leather and armed with federal authority. The leader, a scarred man missing 2 fingers on his left hand, dismounted with the casual arrogance of someone used to getting his way through violence. "You Jake Morrison?" the man called out. Jake stepped onto his porch, rifle held casually but ready. "I am. You're on my land." "Name's Pete Sullivan. These are my associates, Carter and Webb." The scarred man gestured to his companions, both of whom remained mounted with hands resting on their gun belts. "We're working with the federal marshals, tracking Apache hostiles." "Haven't seen any Apache," Jake said evenly. Sullivan smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "That's so. Funny thing, we heard different. Heard there might be a young Apache squaw in these parts, girl about 12, 13 years old." "Heard from who?" "Sources, reliable sources." Sullivan stepped closer to the porch. "Mind if we take a look around, just to be thorough?" Jake's grip tightened on his rifle. "I do mind, as a matter of fact." "This is private property. Now, Morrison, don't make this difficult. We got federal backing on this. You interfere with our investigation. That makes you an accessory to harboring enemy combatants." Sullivan's voice carried the weight of legal authority, but his eyes promised something much more violent. Behind him, Carter and Webb spread out slightly, A tactical movement Jake recognized from his military days. They were positioning themselves for a fight, if it came to that. "Search away," Jake said finally, stepping aside. "But you break anything, you pay for it." Sullivan nodded to his men, who dismounted and began searching the area around the cabin. Jake prayed Maria had the sense to stay hidden and stay quiet. The search was thorough, but not systematic. These weren't trained investigators. They were bounty hunters with federal licenses, more interested in quick money than proper procedure. They checked the barn, poked around the corral, even looked in Jake's outhouse. Finally, Sullivan approached the cabin door. "Mind if I check inside?" Jake's heart hammered, but he stepped aside. "Help yourself." Sullivan pushed through the door with Carter close behind. Jake followed, trying to look casual while his every nerve screamed danger. The cabin was small enough to search quickly. Sullivan checked behind the stove, under the table, even opened Jake's trunk of personal belongings. Carter poked at the bed with his boot, then lifted the mattress. From her hiding spot in the root cellar beneath the floor, Maria would be able to hear every footstep, every creaking board. Jake could only hope she had the discipline to remain absolutely silent. Sullivan paused in the center of the room, sniffing the air like a hunting dog. "Smell that, Carter?" Carter inhaled deeply. "Smells like cooking and something else." "Herbs," Jake said quickly. "Apache herbs. I use them for my rheumatism. Bought them off a trader last month." It wasn't entirely a lie. Jake had learned some Apache plant medicine during his cavalry days, and he had used herbs to help treat Maria's fever. Sullivan accepted this explanation with a grunt. He walked to the window and looked out at the desert landscape, then turned back to Jake with a cold smile. "Morrison, you strike me as an honest man, so I'm going to be straight with you. That Apache girl we're hunting, she's not just any Indian. She's connected to Red Cloud himself. Personal connection." Jake forced himself to look surprised. Red Cloud? The war chief, most wanted Indian in the territory. Now, if someone was harboring let's call her his property, that person would be making a very dangerous enemy of the United States government. Sullivan stepped closer, and Jake could smell whiskey and tobacco on his breath. "But more than that," Sullivan continued, "they'd be making an enemy of me. And I take that personal." He held up his left hand, showing the stumps where his fingers used to be. "Apache did this to me 3 years ago. Cut them off while I was still alive. So when I find that girl, and I will find her, it's going to be a very unpleasant day for anyone who helped hide her." "Like I said," Jake replied steadily, "haven't seen any Apache." Sullivan studied Jake's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Maybe not. But if you do see anything suspicious, you'll let us know, won't you? There's good money in it for cooperative citizens, and bad consequences for uncooperative ones." After they left, Jake waited a full hour before opening the root cellar. Maria emerged pale and shaking, dirt in her hair and fear in her eyes. "They want to hurt me," she said in her improving English. Jake nodded grimly. "Yes, they do." Maria looked up at him with those intelligent dark eyes. "Why? You save me?" she asked again. This time, Jake still didn't have an answer, but as he looked at this frightened child who trusted him completely, he realized the answer didn't matter. What mattered was what he chose to do next. And that choice was getting more dangerous by the hour. 3 days passed before Maria felt safe enough to tell Jake her story. They sat by the fireplace after supper, the flames casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Maria had been practicing her English with determination, and now she could speak in halting but clear sentences. "I tell you why they hunt me," she said, staring into the fire. "I tell you why my people cast me out." Jake set down his coffee cup. "You don't have to if you don't want to. I want." Maria's voice was steady, but Jake could see the pain in her eyes. "You save me. You have right to know." She took a deep breath and began. "I born during dark sun." "Eclipse?" "Yes, eclipse." "Apache people say, child born when sun dies, child brings death to tribe." Maria's fingers absently traced the carved symbols on her arms. "These marks mean cursed one, mean person who brings bad luck to all Apache." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. He'd heard of such superstitions among various tribes, but to actually cast out a child. "My mother died giving birth," Maria continued. "Father died in battle with blue coats 2 winters later. Uncle took me in, but tribe elders said I bring death, said I curse anyone who helped me." "Your uncle?" Maria looked directly at Jake, and he saw something flicker in her expression, fear mixed with love and desperate hope. "My uncle is Red Cloud." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "Red Cloud is your uncle?" Maria nodded. "He protect me long time, fight elders, say I just child, curse is what you call stupid talk." But then came drought. 3 seasons, no rain, cattle die, people hungry, and then soldiers attack village, kill many warriors. Jake's mind raced. Red Cloud's niece. He'd been harboring the most wanted war chief's blood relative. If the federal authorities knew. "Elders say all bad things happen because of me," Maria continued. "Say Red Cloud must choose, tribe or cursed girl. Choose people or dead sister's daughter." What did he choose? Tears began to flow down Maria's cheeks. He choose tribe, had to choose tribe, but he not let them kill me. He take me far from camp, give me water and food for 3 days. He say, "Little hawk, I cannot keep you, but I not kill you. Go find new people. Find white people who maybe not know about curse." "Little hawk?" "My Apache name. Red Cloud give it to me when I learned to hunt." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "He cry when he leave me. Uncle cry, but he still leave." Jake felt something break inside his chest. This child had been abandoned by everyone who should have protected her, cast out by her own people, hunted by the federal government, and left to die alone in the desert. "So I walk," Maria continued, "walk for days. Very hungry, very thirsty. Think I die alone, like cursed ones supposed to die. But then I find your well. Find kind eyes who give water and make me not cursed anymore." Jake stared into the fire, processing this revelation. Red Cloud's niece. The most feared Apache war chief in the territory had a 12-year-old girl as his greatest weakness, and now that girl was sitting in Jake's cabin, safe under his protection. "Maria," Jake said carefully, "when you said Red Cloud would come for you, what did you mean?" "I not know." Her voice became small and uncertain. "Maybe he change mind. Maybe he remember Little Hawk and come find me. Or maybe—" She trailed off. "Maybe what?" "Maybe he come to finish what elders want. Make sure cursed one really dead." The implications hit Jake like a landslide. If Red Cloud came looking for his niece, would it be to rescue her or to kill her? And if federal marshals were already hunting her, what would happen when they learned she was Red Cloud's blood? Jake looked at Maria, This intelligent, brave child who'd survived abandonment, starvation, and a desert crossing that would have killed grown men. Cursed? The only curse Jake could see was the stupidity and cruelty of people who would sacrifice a child to their fears. "Maria," he said gently, "you're not cursed. You hear me? Whatever happened to your tribe, whatever bad luck they had, it wasn't because of you." She looked at him with desperate hope. "You sure?" "I'm sure." Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, a lonely sound that seemed to echo across the vast desert. But as Jake listened, he realized it wasn't a coyote. The sound was too rhythmic, too purposeful. It was a signal. Someone was out there in the darkness, communicating across the wasteland. Apache smoke signals had been spotted during the day, but this was different. This was closer. Jake reached for his rifle. "Maria, get away from the window." As she moved deeper into the cabin, the signal came again. 3 short calls, then silence. Someone was coming. The only question was whether they came as friend or enemy. Jake woke to the sound of Maria screaming. He bolted upright in his bedroll on the floor, rifle in hand, scanning the cabin for danger. But Maria wasn't being attacked. She was trapped in a nightmare, thrashing on the bed and crying out in Apache. "Maria!" Jake set down his weapon and gently shook her shoulder. "Maria, wake up." Her eyes flew open, wild with terror. For a moment she didn't recognize him. Then awareness flooded back, and she sagged with relief. "Bad dream," she whispered in English. "Dream about soldiers." About fire. Jake had seen enough war nightmares to recognize the signs. "You're safe," he said quietly. It was just a dream. But even as he comforted her, Jake knew their safety was an illusion. Word was spreading through the territory about the Apache girl. Murphy had mentioned federal marshals, but Jake was hearing other rumors too. Whispers in town about bounty hunters and Indian sympathizers. The next morning brought unwelcome news. Jake was repairing fence when he spotted a rider approaching from the east. It was Murphy again, but this time his face carried grim urgency. "Jake, we got problems," Murphy called out as he dismounted. "Federal Marshal Clayton's been through town asking specific questions about you." Jake's blood went cold. "About me?" "About your war service. About your sympathies toward Indians." Murphy glanced nervously toward the cabin. "Jake, I got to ask straight out. You got that Apache girl here or not?" For a long moment, Jake considered lying again. But Murphy was a friend, and friends deserved better than lies. "Yes," Jake said simply. Murphy closed his eyes and shook his head. "Jesus, Jake, do you have any idea what you've done?" "Saved a child's life." "Saved a child's life? That girl is Red Cloud's niece. The federal government's got a $500 bounty on her, and they're calling anyone who helps her a traitor to the United States of America. $500. The bounty had increased 5-fold in just a few days. "Jake, listen to me," Murphy continued urgently. "Marshal Clayton's not just looking to arrest that girl. He's looking to make an example. He's talking about conspiracy charges, about treason. You could hang for this." Jake absorbed this news with outward calm, but inside his mind was racing. If Clayton was escalating to treason charges, it meant the federal government was taking Maria's case personally. And she wasn't just any Apache child. She was a political symbol. "There's more," Murphy said reluctantly. "Clayton's been asking about your war service, specifically about that incident in New Mexico." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. The New Mexico incident. The thing he'd spent 10 years trying to forget. How does he know about that? Military records. Seems when they started investigating you for harboring Apache, they dug up your entire service history. Murphy's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. Jake, they know what your unit did at Canyon de Chelly. Canyon de Chelly. The Apache village his cavalry unit had destroyed on false intelligence, killing 47 people including women and children. The massacre that had ended Jake's military career and sent him fleeing to this isolated ranch. They're calling it a pattern, Murphy continued. First, you participate in killing Apache. Now you're harboring them. Clayton thinks you're either a spy or you've gone soft. Either way, he wants you brought in. Jake stared across his desert property, seeing not the peaceful landscape, but the ghosts of Canyon de Chelly. Burning wickiups, screaming horses, the faces of Apache children who looked just like Maria. How long do I have? Clayton's gathering more men. He'll be back within the week, maybe sooner. Jake, you got to turn that girl over. It's the only way to save yourself. After Murphy left, Jake sat on his porch watching the sun set behind the western mountains. Inside the cabin, Maria was teaching herself to read using Jake's old Bible, sounding out words with determined concentration. She was smart, this kid. Smart and brave and innocent of everything except the crime of being born during an eclipse. The Apache had cast her out for superstition, and now the federal government wanted to use her as a political pawn. Jake made his decision. That evening, he began teaching Maria to shoot. If trouble was coming, she needed to know how to protect herself. Hold steady, he instructed as she aimed his old Colt at a tin can 20 yards away. Breathe out halfway, then squeeze gentle-like. The shot went wide, but not by much. Maria was a natural. Why you teach me this? She asked as she reloaded. Because sometimes bad men come, and good people got to know how to fight back. Maria nodded solemnly. Bad men come for me? Bad men come for both of us, Jake said honestly. That night, Jake woke to find Maria's bedroll empty. Panic shot through him until he spotted her on the porch, staring out at the desert stars. Can't sleep? He asked, joining her. I bring danger to kind eyes, she said quietly. Maybe I should go. Maybe you should stay. Red Cloud teach me. Sometimes one person must sacrifice for many people. Jake looked at this 12-year-old girl talking about sacrifice with the gravity of an elder. Red Cloud teach you anything about family? Family protect family, always. That's right, and you're my family now. Maria looked up at him with surprise. Family? Family. As dawn broke over the eastern mountains, Jake found a note tucked under his coffee cup. It was written in Maria's careful English. Kind eyes must live. Little hawk goes home to die. Thank you for making me not cursed. Maria was gone. Jake tracked Maria's footprints into the desert, following the small impressions her moccasins left in the sand. She'd taken water and dried meat, but not nearly enough for the journey she was attempting. In this heat, without proper supplies, she'd be dead within 2 days. He found her collapsed beside a dry creek bed 5 miles from the ranch, unconscious and burning with heat exhaustion. Her water was gone, her lips cracked and bleeding. Jake's heart nearly stopped when he first thought she was already dead. Maria! He lifted her limp form and carried her to the shade of a boulder, then forced water between her lips. Come on, little hawk. Come back to me. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with effort. Kind eyes, she whispered. Don't talk. Just drink. As she recovered in the shade, Jake's relief turned to anger. Don't you ever do that again. You hear me? Don't you ever run off like that. I protect you. Maria said weakly. You protect me by staying alive, by staying with me. Jake's voice cracked with emotion he hadn't expected. Your family, Maria. Family doesn't abandon family. They sat in silence for several minutes, the desert heat shimmering around them. Finally, Maria spoke in a voice so quiet, Jake almost missed it. I know who you are, Kind Eyes. Jake looked at her, confused. What do you mean? I know what you do at Canyon de Chelly. The words hit Jake like bullets. He stared at Maria, seeing not accusation in her eyes, but something far more devastating, complete understanding. How? He managed. Apache, remember everything. Stories pass from grandmother to granddaughter, father to son. Canyon de Chelly story told many times around fires. Maria's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. Blue-coat soldiers come to village, say they hunt bad Apache who steal cattle. Village chiefs say, no bad Apache here, only families. But soldiers not believe. Soldiers kill everyone. Jake felt the desert spinning around him. Maria. My mother and father there that day. Young married people visiting my mother's sister. They die when soldiers shoot into lodges. Maria looked directly at Jake. You there too. You one of Bluecoat soldiers. Jake closed his eyes, seeing again the burning wickiups, hearing again the screams and gunfire. Lieutenant Morrison, following orders from a captain who claimed intelligence about Apache raiders. But there had been no raiders at Canyon de Chelly, only families. We were told they were hostiles, Jake said weakly. I know. Uncle Red Cloud tell me later. White chiefs lie to soldiers, make them think peaceful people are warriors. You not choose to kill my people, but you there when they die. Jake opened his eyes, expecting to see hatred. Instead, he saw something that broke his heart. Forgiveness. Why? He asked. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you hate me? At first, I hate. When I recognize your face by firelight, I want to kill you while you sleep. Maria's voice remained calm, almost clinical. But then I see Kind Eyes save cursed girl nobody want. I see Kind Eyes make family with enemy child. I see Kind Eyes choose to protect what others throw away. She reached out and touched Jake's weathered hand. Apache believe man can be born again. Old man with blood on hands can die. New man with clean heart can live. You die at Canyon de Chelly, Kind Eyes. Jake Morrison die with my parents, but Kind Eyes born when you find Little Hawk at well. Jake felt tears he hadn't cried in 20 years burning his eyes. This child, this incredibly wise, impossibly forgiving child, had looked past his worst sin and chosen to see his heart instead. Maria, I'm so sorry. If I could take it back. No take back. Only live forward. Only choose better path. They might have sat there all day, lost in the weight of revelation and forgiveness, but the sound of approaching horses snapped them back to immediate danger. Dust clouds were rising from the direction of the ranch. Multiple riders, moving fast. Federal marshals, Jake said grimly. As they hurried back toward the ranch, staying low behind ridge lines and desert scrub, Jake could see the situation clearly. Marshal Clayton and at least 6 deputies had surrounded his cabin. More men were positioned behind his barn and near the well. They'd come prepared for a siege. They know about me, Maria said, watching the scene through Jake's field glasses. They know about both of us. As if to confirm his words, Jake spotted a familiar figure directing the operation. Marshal Clayton was a tall man in a black coat, and he was pointing toward various defensive positions around the ranch. But something else caught Jake's eye. On the distant mesas, barely visible in the afternoon haze, smoke signals were rising. 3 columns of smoke, then 2, then 1, Apache signals. Someone was watching this confrontation, and word was being passed across the desert at the speed of smoke and mirrors. "Uncle knows," Maria said quietly. "Red Cloud? He knows soldiers come for Little Hawk. He knows kind eyes in danger." Maria lowered the field glasses and looked at Jake with eyes far too old for her face. Now Uncle must choose again, tribe or family. They waited until full dark before approaching the ranch. Jake's property was surrounded, but the federal marshals had made the mistake of positioning themselves for a dawn assault, not expecting their quarry to return in the night. Jake and Maria crept to within 100 yards of the cabin, close enough to hear Marshal Clayton briefing his men. "Morrison's a former cavalry officer," Clayton's voice carried across the still air. "He knows tactics, so don't underestimate him. But he's got nowhere to run, and he's protecting that Apache girl. Desperate men make mistakes." Jake counted at least 8 men, armed with rifles and positioned behind cover. They'd taken over his ranch like an occupying army. "What's the plan, Marshal?" one of the deputies asked. "We wait for first light. Then we demand surrender. If Morrison comes out with his hands up and turns over the girl, we take him alive for trial. If he resists—" Clayton didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood the alternative. Jake and Maria crept back to a safe distance before speaking. "They want to take you alive," Maria whispered. "For now. But if Red Cloud shows up with warriors, they'll kill us both to prevent a rescue." As if summoned by his words, the sound of drums began to echo across the desert. Distant at first, then growing closer. The rhythmic beating seemed to come from multiple directions: north, east, south. Apache war drums. Jake saw the effect immediately. The federal marshals began repositioning themselves, nervous voices carrying on the night air. They'd come to arrest 1 man and a child, but now they faced the possibility of fighting Apache warriors on their home ground. "How many warriors does Red Cloud have?" Jake asked. "Many. More than white soldiers expect." The drumming continued through the night, sometimes close, sometimes distant, but never stopping. Jake recognized the psychological warfare. The Apache were letting the marshals know they were surrounded, watched, and vastly outnumbered. But Jake also knew something the Apache didn't. These weren't just local law enforcement. These were federal marshals with military backing. If shooting started, reinforcements would come, lots of them. As dawn approached, Jake made a decision that surprised even himself. He pulled out paper and began writing by the light of a small fire. "What you do?" Maria asked. "Writing a letter. To you. But I hear. In case I'm not." Jake continued writing, his hand steady despite the circumstances. "Maria, there's things I need you to know. About why I stayed with the cavalry after Canyon de Chelly. About why I came to this desert to live alone. About why finding you changed everything." The letter was short, but said everything Jake needed to say. He folded it and handed it to Maria. "Keep this safe. If something happens to me, you'll understand why I made the choices I did." Maria tucked the letter into her dress without reading it. Nothing happened to Kind Eyes. Little Hawk not let it. The first hint of dawn was lightening the eastern sky when Marshal Clayton's voice boomed across the desert. "Jake Morrison, I know you're out there. This is United States Marshal Clayton. You're surrounded and wanted on federal charges of treason, conspiracy, and harboring enemy combatants." Jake looked at Maria one last time. Stay here no matter what happens. Promise me." "I promise." Jake stood up from behind their cover and walked toward his ranch, hands visible but not raised. He stopped 50 yards from the cabin, well within rifle range of multiple federal guns. "I'm here, Marshal," Jake called back. Clayton emerged from behind the barn, flanked by 2 deputies with rifles trained on Jake. "Where's the Apache girl?" "Safe. Bring her out." "Now." "Can't do that, Marshal." "Then you're under arrest for treason against the United States of America." The drums were getting louder now, and Jake could see movement on the surrounding mesas. Figures on horseback, too many to count in the dim light. "Marshal," Jake said loudly enough for all the federal men to hear, "you might want to look around before you do something you'll regret." Clayton followed Jake's gaze to the ridge lines surrounding the ranch. Even in the pale dawn light, the silhouettes were unmistakable. Apache warriors on horseback, positioned on every high point within a mile of the ranch. "Jesus Christ," one of the deputies whispered. "How many are there?" Clayton's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Doesn't matter how many there are. Federal law is federal law. You're coming with us, Morrison." The marshal raised his hand to signal his men, but before he could give the order, the drumming stopped. The sudden silence was more ominous than the sound had been. Then, from the eastern mesa, came a sound that made every white man present reach for his weapon, the war cry of 200 Apache warriors echoing across the desert like the voice of the land itself. Jake smiled grimly. Red Cloud had made his choice. As the sun broke over the horizon, it illuminated a sight that would be talked about in the territory for decades, an entire Apache war party cresting the ridge, painted for battle, with the most feared war chief in America at their head. The siege of Jake Morrison's ranch was about to become something much bigger. Red Cloud came with the sunrise. Jake had seen Apache war parties before, but nothing like this. 200 mounted warriors crested the eastern ridge in perfect formation, their horses stepping with the disciplined precision of a military unit. War paint gleamed on faces and chests, and morning light glinted off rifle barrels and lance points. At their head rode Red Cloud himself, a man Jake recognized from wanted posters but had never seen in person. The war chief was smaller than the legend suggested, but there was an unmistakable authority in the way he sat his horse and surveyed the scene below. The federal marshals were thoroughly outflanked. 8 men with rifles faced 200 Apache warriors on their home ground, with no hope of reinforcement arriving in time to matter. "Holy Mother of God," one of the deputies whispered. Marshal Clayton's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. "Hold your positions. Nobody shoots unless I give the order." Red Cloud raised his hand, and the war party halted as one. Then he guided his horse down the slope at a walk, approaching the tense standoff with the calm confidence of someone who held all the advantages. He stopped 30 yards from the cabin, close enough to be heard clearly, and spoke in accented but clear English. "I am Red Cloud. I come for my family." Clayton stepped forward, hand on his pistol. "I'm United States Marshal Clayton. That girl is wanted by the federal government. So is the man protecting her. Girl is Apache. Apache business. The girl is on United States territory, which makes her United States business." Red Cloud's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "White man's paper say this Apache land belongs to white man. White man's paper lie many times before." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. 8 federal guns against 200 Apache warriors, with Jake and Maria somewhere between them. One wrong word, one nervous trigger finger, and the desert would run red. That's when Maria stepped out from behind the rocks where Jake had left her. "Uncle," she called in English, walking calmly toward the center of the standoff. "I am here." "Maria, get back!" Jake shouted, but she ignored him. Red Cloud's stern expression softened as he saw his niece. "Little Hawk, you are well?" "I am well, Uncle. Kind Eyes protected me." "Kind Eyes?" Maria gestured toward Jake. "The man who found me dying at his well. The man who made me family when my own people said I was cursed." Red Cloud studied Jake with new interest. "You are Jake Morrison." "I am." "You know who I am?" "I know who you are." "You know there is bounty on my head, big reward for man who kills Red Cloud?" Jake nodded. "I know." "You know I could kill you for touching Apache child?" "I know that too." Red Cloud was silent for a long moment, then spoke in Apache to Maria. She responded in the same language, gesturing toward Jake and speaking with obvious emotion. The conversation continued for several minutes while the federal marshals waited in tense confusion. Finally, Red Cloud turned back to Jake. "Little Hawk tells me interesting story. She says you save her life when she was dying. She says you feed her, protect her, teach her. She says you make her not cursed anymore." "She was never cursed," Jake replied. "She's a good kid who got dealt a bad hand." "She also tell me something else." Red Cloud's voice carried a new weight. "She tell me you were soldier at Canyon de Shelly." Jake felt every eye in the clearing focus on him. The federal marshals looked confused, but the Apache warriors tensed, hands moving to weapons. "She tell me you were there when my sister and her husband died," Red Cloud continued. "You were there when soldiers killed peaceful people." Marshal Clayton's eyes widened as he realized the implications. "Morrison, what is he talking about?" Jake met Red Cloud's gaze steadily. "I was there. I followed orders I should have questioned. Good people died because of what I did." "And yet," Red Cloud said, his voice carrying across the silent clearing, "when you found my sister's daughter dying in the desert, you saved her. When white law said turn her over for money, you protected her. When bounty hunters came with threats, you chose her safety over your own." The war chief dismounted and walked slowly toward Jake, stopping just out of arm's reach. "Apache law says, blood debt must be paid with blood. You helped kill my family, so your blood belongs to me." Jake nodded. "I understand. But Apache law also says, warrior who shows mercy to enemy child shows honor. Honor deserves honor." Red Cloud reached into his vest and pulled out a single eagle feather, its white tip marked with red paint. 200 warriors come here today. White Marshal think we come for war, come for revenge. But Maria send message. White man with kind eyes protect Apache child like she was his own daughter. Apache law very clear about this. He held up the feather. We come to honor debt. We come to protect man who protected our blood. Marshal Clayton's jaw dropped. "What are you saying?" Red Cloud turned to face the marshal, still holding the feather. "I say, this white man is now Apache. I say he under protection of Red Cloud's warriors. Touch him, you touch Apache Nation." The twist hit everyone like thunder. 200 warriors hadn't come for revenge. They'd come to claim Jake as family. But Clayton's face hardened with desperate resolve. "Apache law means nothing here. Federal law supersedes." The marshal's hand moved toward his gun, but his words were cut short by the distinctive sound of 200 rifles being cocked in unison. Red Cloud smiled coldly. "You want to test that theory, Marshal?" The standoff, stretched taut as a bowstring, 8 federal guns against 200 Apache warriors, with justice hanging in the balance like smoke on desert wind. Marshal Clayton's hand hovered over his pistol, but Jake could see the calculation in his eyes. Even if he drew and fired, he and his men would be dead before their bodies hit the ground. But Clayton was a federal marshal, sworn to uphold United States law, regardless of personal cost. His duty was clear, even if it meant his death. That's when Maria stepped forward again, positioning herself directly between the two forces. "Stop," she said in her clear, accented English. "All of you, stop." She looked at Clayton first. "Marshal, you hunt me because you say I am enemy of your people. But what I do? I am 12 winters old. I never hurt white person, never steal, never fight. My only crime is being born Apache during eclipse." Then she turned to Red Cloud. "Uncle, you come to protect Kind Eyes because he protect me. This is good. But these white soldiers, they also follow their law, their duty. If you kill them for doing duty, you same as them." Finally she faced Jake. "Kind Eyes, you think you must pay blood debt for Canyon de Chelly. But you already pay. You pay by saving me. You pay by choosing to protect rather than destroy." The 12-year-old girl stood in the center of armed men, speaking with the authority of someone far beyond her years. "I tell all of you something. There is no justice in more killing. Apache kill white soldiers, more soldiers come. White soldiers kill Apache, more warriors come. Blood debt never end this way." She gestured toward Jake. "Kind Eyes show different way. He see Apache child dying and choose to save, not kill. Choose to heal, not hurt. This is how blood debt really get paid, not with more blood, but with mercy." Red Cloud listened intently, then spoke in Apache to his warriors. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he could see the effect. Weapons slowly lowered, though they remained ready. "Little Hawk speaks wisdom," Red Cloud said finally. "But White Law still wants to take her, take the man who protected her. How do we solve this?" Maria looked directly at Marshal Clayton. "Marshal, your law say I am criminal. Your law say Kind Eyes is traitor. But what if your law wrong? What if there is different way to think about justice?" Clayton's jaw worked silently. Jake could see the man struggling with something deeper than duty, struggling with what was right versus what was legal. "The law is the law," Clayton said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Whose law?" Maria asked simply. "White man law? Apache law? Or law that live in every person's heart? Law that say, protect children, show mercy, choose kindness over cruelty?" Before Clayton could answer, a voice came from behind the federal line. "She's right." Everyone turned to see old Murphy approaching on horseback, but he wasn't alone. Behind him rode a dozen ranchers and townspeople, Jake's neighbors, people who had fled when trouble started. Murphy dismounted and walked into the clearing, his hands clearly visible and empty. "Marshal Clayton, I've known Jake Morrison for 8 years. He's the most decent man in this territory. If he chose to protect that child, then she needed protecting." "Murphy, stay out of this," Clayton warned. "Can't do that, Marshal. See, we had a meeting in town last night. Talked to some folks who know the real story about what happened at Canyon de Chelly. Turns out Jake's unit was following false intelligence about Apache raiders. They were told they were attacking hostiles, but it was just families." Murphy stepped closer to Clayton. We also talked to some Apache traders who know this girl's story, know about her being cast out for superstition, left to die. If Jake hadn't saved her, she'd be bones in the desert right now. Other voices joined in. That's right, Marshal. Girl needed help, Jake gave it. That's not treason, that's human decency. Jake watched in amazement as his community, neighbors who had abandoned him just days before, now stood in his defense. The sight of 200 Apache warriors protecting a white man had somehow shown them what true justice looked like. Clayton looked around at the faces surrounding him. Apache warriors, white settlers, and one 12-year-old girl who had somehow brought them together. Finally, he holstered his weapon. Jake Morrison, Clayton said formally, by the authority vested in me as a United States Marshal, I'm placing you under protective custody. Jake blinked in confusion. What? Protective custody? Seems there's been threats against your life, and it's my duty to ensure your safety. Clayton's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. Course, if you were to be adopted into an Apache tribe, that would put you under different jurisdiction entirely. Federal government's got no authority over internal tribal matters. Red Cloud stepped forward and placed the eagle feather in Jake's hair. Welcome to family, brother. As the sun climbed higher over the Arizona desert, Jake Morrison became the first white man to be adopted into Red Cloud's band, not as prisoner or treaty obligation, but as family. Justice had been served, not through law or warfare, but through the simple recognition that mercy was stronger than vengeance, and love more powerful than hate. 15 years later, Jake Morrison still lives on that same desert ranch, but he's no longer alone. The Apache call him Father of Two Worlds, and Maria, now a respected medicine woman, visits every full moon with her own children, teaching them the ways of kindness that saved her life. You see, folks, in our time, we talk a lot about justice, but we forget that real justice isn't always found in courtrooms or law books. Sometimes justice is as simple as offering water to the dying, shelter to the cast out, and dignity to those the world has forgotten. Jake Morrison never did anything extraordinary by his own lights. And he just saw a child in need and did what his conscience told him was right, even when it cost him everything. But that simple act of human decency echoed across 15 years and changed two peoples forever. The truth is, most of us walk through life looking for the big moments, the grand gestures that'll prove we're good people. But real goodness lives in the small choices, stopping for the stranger by the roadside, speaking kindly to the waitress having a bad day, standing up for the kid getting picked on at school. Maria grew up knowing that somewhere in this hard world there was at least one person who saw her not as a burden or a curse, but as a human being worthy of life and love. And maybe that's all any of us really need. Just one person who believes we're worth saving. Jake learned something that desert morning when he found a dying child by his well. Sometimes the people we're supposed to fear most are just folks trying to make it through another day, same as us. Apache or Anglo, redskin or white, we all bleed the same, cry the same, and need the same things: food, shelter, and somebody to care whether we live or die. The desert winds still blow across Jake's ranch, but they carry different sounds now. Children's laughter, mixing Apache and English, the songs of two cultures learning to live as one. Because sometimes the greatest wars are won not with bullets and blood, but with warm water, gentle hands, and the simple recognition that we're all just people trying to find our way home. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs reminding that kindness still matters in this world. Because like Jake Morrison learned, The smallest acts of mercy can echo through generations.